If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description. Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. You are listening to the Steven Avery series, examining the questions that no one else wants to examine. Today, we are on episode 19, and we are going to go over some pupil questions about pupil casings. In our constant examination of evidence, supposed evidence, against Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey, that whenever logical scrutiny, critical thinking, deductive reason, whenever any brain power of any sort is applied to scrutinize this so-called evidence, it doesn't seem to stand up. Do you find that strange, Maxwell?
I don't understand it, but what the hell is a pupil? What did you say?
All right, we'll get into that in a second. I am your host, Bruce McGuire, here with the one and only legendary
Maxwell Powers.
As always, if you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button, and feel free to share it across social media platforms. You can check us out on Twitter, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case or topic and podcaster requests. Make sure you like and follow our Facebook page for exclusive content. Any questions, comments, theories, rebuttals, leave them in the comment section. All right, Maxwell. So you don't know what a pupil casing is?
Yeah, what the hell is it?
So do you know what a pupa is?
No. I know pupil is a student, like a pupil.
So
I don't hear that very often, though. I'm a pupil or pupils.
yeah, a pupa is the life stage of certain insects that transform between immature and mature stages. The pupal stage is found only in holometabolous insects, those that undergo a complete metamorphosis with 4 stages of life: egg, larva, pupa, and imago. So we're talking about insect type cocoons.
Gotcha. So you're talking metaphorically, whatever you said before.
No, I'm talking literally.
Oh, can you repeat what you just said before?
About what?
There's something like the pupil, something.
So we're talking basically cocoons. So most pupae consist of a protective outer casing, inside which the tissues of the insect undergo a drastic reorganization to form the adult body. So do you know how like snakes shed their skin and all that stuff?
Yeah.
So insects do similar things between when they're moving between life stages. You didn't know that?
Some.
You've never seen a pupal casing, so it's kind of like just an
I've
insect.
I've seen them around.
Yeah, okay, so you do know what it is.
Yeah,
So why'd you say you didn't?
because I thought you said pupil.
Oh, no, pupal, P-U-P-A-L.
Yeah, I know. You clarified that.
Okay, so you're all good now. All right.
Yeah.
So let's examine this. So you do know in the official narrative, Teresa Hallback's bones were cut before they were burned.
Yeah.
So, and there are tool marks on the bones that were allegedly recovered, the alleged bones allegedly recovered from the Janda burn barrel. And the tool marks, there's pupil casings. And this
Okay.
was evidence that was tested by the FBI. The tag is 7964. So keep in mind, the whole property was searched and the quarries were searched. There was no evidence of any kind of bloody corpse dismembering. There was no evidence in the garage, no evidence in the bedroom, no evidence on any of the grounds. There's no evidence. These are the greatest, if they did it, they're the greatest criminal masterminds in the history of crime. But however, these bones show tool marks on them. So if they are human bones, if they are Teresa Hallback, I mean, there's a lot of ifs here, a lot of assumptions and presuppositions, not a lot of actual factual scientific proof. That seems to be missing across the board here. I mean, guilters seem to not understand what beyond a reasonable doubt means, but in any case, it's unknown if Avery did commit the crime. Where did he sever her body? So at trial, apparently these cuts were produced by a multi-tooth cutting tools utilizing a sawing action. A tool mark which appears on specimen Q14.1 has a blade with a width of 0.03 inches, 30th of an inch. So some people think that, I mean, what are the options? He dismembered her if he did it, or whoever the real murderer is, if it's actually her body. I mean, this case is so ridiculous. I have to layer all these ifs to stay actually consistent with objective truth, because none of these things have been definitively proved in any way by any measure of the scientific method. However, if there was a murder, and if the victim was Teresa Hallback, and if these bones are even hers, someone dismembered her either before or after burning. So, referring to the burned calcined long bone shaft fragment, tag number 7964, alteration to the postcranial bone is largely related to the fire effect, with the possible exception of cut marks and a saw kerf observed on burned calcined long bone shaft fragment, tag number 7964. So these are the statements at trial. And the burn fragments did not have any sign of fresh cut ends. So that would mean that these were not cut after burning. And on 7964, you can see the visible cuts are superficial, and they don't go all the way through the bone. So does that mean, so these criminal masterminds, did they try to cut through the bones and then they didn't do a good job, so they couldn't dismember it as many pieces as they wanted to? And then why'd they burn it? And keep in mind, all this was supposedly going on with a house full of neighbors in broad daylight. And nobody heard or saw anything. Okay, so what do you think of all that information, Maxwell? You following?
There's a lot of inconsistencies with wait, what are they saying? That
Well, I
they
just said.
no, like there's like her bones were all cut up, like someone cut them, supposedly before or after, but that's not what really happened. I don't know. What'd you say?
Well, why didn't you just pay attention?
I didn't know. What's the conclusion with that? Is there a conclusion, or are you just
There
telling
is
us?
no conclusion. This is a podcast where we're discussing theories, Maxwell.
So what's the theory that
Well, we're discussing the possible theories that align with these statements, the statements that I just read.
I didn't follow.
Okay, so okay, I guess I'll do it again. These saw marks on the bones were the evidence presented at trial. It was stated that these cuts were produced by a multi-tooth cutting tool utilizing a sawing action. A tool mark which appears on specimen Q14.1 has a blade width of 0.03 inches. Alteration to the postcranial bone is largely related to the fire effect, with the possible exception of cut marks and a saw kerf observed on a burned calcined long bone shaft fragment, tag 7964. So it seems like these cut marks were before the burning of the alleged murdered body. Are you not following any of this? Do you even know we're talking about the Steven Avery case?
Yeah, the theory is that it's most likely that it was cut before the burning.
Right. If they were her bones, if they're even human bones, and if they really were in the Janda pile, because we all know the mix and match switcheroos that can happen in Manitowoc County. So if that's all true, fine. But yeah, so we're just discussing how it was possible to dismember the body with no evidence. And it seems like it was dismembered before the burning, but even if it was after the burning, when did all this take place with the house full of neighbors? And people coming and going on the property in broad daylight?
Oh, I see. It's kind of weird.
Well, I mean, none of this whole case is weird. None of the state's case makes any sense. But anyway, that's what was presented at trial, because you have to present a narrative.
So what you're saying is like there should be so much evidence that there was a cutting before the burning that it's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous theory.
And not only that, but some of the cut marks don't go through the bone, so that means it was a failed, like the cutting the body into pieces was not a good process. They weren't able to cut through. So this is, I mean, if these are even human, we don't even know if these are human bones. And we don't know whose bones they are if they are human bones. But and when did these, so we really don't know a lot about any of this. But keep in mind, the cadaver dogs did not hit on Avery's burn pit. So if we're trusting the dogs, who if there was a grand conspiracy and cover up, they didn't tell the dogs that there was a $36 million lawsuit and the fix was in against Avery. So the dogs didn't know about it. Otherwise, if they could convince the dogs to bark as if there was a hit, even if there wasn't, maybe they would have found some. Maybe the cadaver dogs would have hit something on the burn pit. So where did it happen? And then they just go around the quarry and the gravel pit, like sprinkling the remains and then putting it in various burn barrels and his neighbors burn. Why would he? It's so weird. Like, if Avery did it, did he think they would just believe that Janda did it, that his sister did it? I mean, what is the thought? What is the thought process of guilters? Like, what is the state's case that Avery wanted to frame his own sister, so that's why he put the remain? Like, he thought they wouldn't find her remains at the last place that she was at, if that was the last place that she was at. It was a place that she was supposed to be at because, for the auto trader appointment. So Avery knows that people know that she would be there. So why, if he did kill her and, cut up her remains and burn them, why would he put them in his sister's burn barrel? Was he trying to frame his sister? Like, what is? I don't understand the narrative here. Can you make sense of this, Maxwell?
Nah, it's kind of weird.
Because if he's going to sprinkle the remains in the Manitowoc gravel pit, the Manitowoc County gravel pit, and he's going around sprinkling it over Radon's property nearby, why would he also frame his sister? I mean, it doesn't. I'm not following the state's case here. I just don't get it.
Unless they really look at him as like really super dumb. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
But then, how did he leave no evidence in his bedroom and the garage where he supposedly shot her in the head? A garage that may have had too many vehicles to even fit any people walking around in there. I mean, none of it. Like, I don't get it. And then when they're examining the crime scene, which is allegedly the bedroom, you got police officers sitting on the bed, hanging out, doing 7 searches and not finding anything, and then magically finding the spare key to her. And how come no guilters want to ask the question where her actual key is with the keychain? It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. Like I've said many times, this whole case seems like a common sense test for adults, because how anybody could think this was a fair trial is, it's hard to believe that they're sincere or they just don't have any brain function. It seems very strange how anybody could think that regardless of whether he's innocent or guilty, that this was a fair trial and wasn't. It seems weird. And then usually the only default they could come to is, well, the jury found him guilty. Well, what does that have to do with the truth? That just means the jury could have been either intimidated or just plain hoodwinked. So humans, the jury members are these infallible humans, the smartest of the smartest. I mean, they're smarter than all scientists, all DNA experts. So their conclusions are infallible, and they never heard of innocent people in prison. The Innocence Project. I mean, there's an estimated between, what is it, 1 and 10% of people are innocent. Then that's the low end estimates that are in prison. And you got constantly, as DNA technology improves, even people that were convicted on DNA evidence, they're getting exonerated as DNA technology has improved and realized that it was a false positive to their DNA. So it's weird how guilters completely ignore all reality to maintain that just because a jury finds someone guilty, that means that they're actually guilty. I mean,
I think the statistics for people in death row, like 1 out of 7 are found innocent and are exonerated.
oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. I didn't look at the specific death row statistics. Yeah, that's terrible if that's true. So I think Zellner's explanations for the saw marks that didn't go all the way through is that if it's someone that doesn't know where all the bones and joints are, they missed the hip joint and they got the other bone, and then they adjusted to do what they needed to do. So I mean, it's kind of bizarre, very, very bizarre. So how long does it take for pupal casings to form? Because how long would the body have to be decomposing before pupil casings were evident? Because the pupil casings suggest that she was left outside for quite some time, right?
Yeah, I guess.
So, and if Avery did kill her, would he leave her lying around for days on end? I mean, does that make any sense? Because the state alleged that he burned her right away in the bonfire. And if you haven't checked out our previous podcast episodes, we go over the legend of the bonfire. There was no bonfire
Uh,
until Manitowoc law enforcement spun that narrative and created the fable of the bonfire. And then all of a sudden, all the witness statements started changing from no bonfire to small bonfire, burn pit fire, and then all of a sudden to flames higher than the garage. You have Scott Tadaiche, Tadaich. The statements that just keep changing. So the state's case is that she was burned right away. So when did these pupil casings? How did they become? How would they have been able to manifest?
how long does it? How long does the? How long does it take for whatever to go through that pupa stage?
Well, hold on a second. So let's look at the actual report. The presence of empty pupil casings, tag 7964, collected November 12th, 2005, from barrel number 2 and identified as burnt bone pieces, suggests that perhaps there was an undocumented interval between Miss Hallback's death and the burning episode when her remains may have been exposed to egg-laying flies. However, it is not possible to determine from this analysis if those pupil casings were associated with the human or non-human fragments identified by the undersigned as collected under that tag number. It is worthy of note, however, that the same evidence number yielded the suspected human bone fragment with evidence for multiple cuts. So that's kind of weird. And there were also like the quarry piles contained bones with cuts as well, and also the Janda burn barrel. So that's 4 different locations of bones with cuts, none of which are from Avery's burn pit. What do you make of that, Maxwell?
Vicious.
So this is from Dr. Eisenberg's forensic anthropology case report, which I just read this excerpt. And there's another description of evidence tag 7964 from trial exhibit 401. And this is detailing that this tag referred to the human bones recovered from the Janda burn barrel. And here's an excerpt from this, which is evidence tag number 7964, consisted of items located in one of the 4 burn barrels found behind the Janda residence, represented the following bones. Which, by the way, so there's 4 burn barrels found behind the Janda residence. So Avery just sprinkled remains in each of the 4. And then also went to to Manitowoc County gravel pit, sprinkled them there, and then also sprinkled some while he was coming to and from across Redon's quarry. Does that seem logical to you, Maxwell?
No.
All right, so let's examine the following bones: the long bone shaft fragments, possible metacarpal fragment, vertebral fragments, and a scapula fragment. In her narrative reports, Dr. Eisenberg indicates that one of the possible human long bone fragment exhibits cut marks. So even the language here, they're not sure that they're human bones. Possible human long bone fragments exhibit cut marks. Would you want to be convicted on a murder charge if the bones of your alleged victim are not even confirmed to be human? How would you feel about that, Maxwell?
I don't know.
Maxwell Army. Okay. As identifications of such a nature fall outside of this author's expertise, the reports prepared by the forensic anthropologist should be referenced for bone condition. So, yes, it would have to be a significant amount of time. So, people online were saying around 6 days for the pupil casings to appear. So,
That's a long time.
so the eggs would have been laid, undergone metamorphosis, and then hatched from the pupil casings. And this would have to be before the body was burned, which means that her body would had to have been kept somewhere for several days. So for housefly metamorphosis, Some astute Redditors, which, by the way, if you want to check out a good Reddit sub on the Steven Avery case, make sure to avoid the highly controlled and propagandized Making a Murderer subreddit with sham mods and just shutting down logical conversations. And you could just check out the TikTok Manitowoc subreddit. It's probably the best sub to get information on the case. And a lot of this information I got from there. But people found links to, we have here the University of Florida Entomology and Nematology report. And they had, this report states the housefly has a complete metamorphosis with distinct egg, larval, or maggot, pupal, and adult stages. The legless maggot emerges from the egg in warm weather within 8 to 20 hours. Larvae complete their development in 4 to 13 days at optimal temperatures, but require 14 to 30 days at temperatures of 12 to 17 degrees Celsius. Pupae complete their development in 2 to 6 days at 32 to 37 degrees Celsius, but require 17 to 27 days at about 14 degrees Celsius. The emerging fly escapes from the pupal case through the use of an alternately swelling and shrinking sac called the ptilinum on the front of its head, which it uses like a pneumatic hammer to break through the case. So optimally, it's 8 hours to maggots plus 4 days to pupae, then 2 days to flies, or 6 1/3 days. So the body would have also been kept somewhere with at least 77 degree Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius temperature, or even warmer.
That's weird because it was winter time, wasn't it?
Correct. So wow, Maxwell remembered something. Let's
Wait,
get a
but
golf
it
clap
wasn't. But
going.
it
Let's get a
wasn't.
golf
But it
clap
wasn't
going
like.
for Maxwell.
But it wasn't like teens. It was like high 20s or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't. It supposedly was not extremely cold, but the pupil. So the body would have had to have been burned on November 5th or 6th or later. So if she was killed on Halloween the 31st, November 6th would have been, that could have been the soonest in regards to these pupal casings. So she would have had to have been burned after November 6th. So this would have nothing to do with the pit, with the bonfire, the myth of the bonfire on Halloween. So November 6th, that's after Manitowoc Law Enforcement took custody of the Avery Salvage Yard. What do you make of that, Maxwell? So the crew.
Say that again.
Okay, so police took custody of the Steven Avery Salvage Yard. Because on November 5th, 2005, that's when Steven Avery and some of his family members, they leave to go to the Crivets cabin. And the volunteer search, led by Pam of God, that happens at around 10:15 a.m. And also, officers do a sweep of Avery's trailer and garage during this initial cursory search when they take custody of the Avery Salvage Yard. And then November 6th, they search Avery's garage. They actually had blood evidence in the garage, but they did not match Teresa Hallback's. This is the November 6th search. And this is also when they searched the trailer. And Brendan Dassey's interviewed in Crivets on November 6th as well. November 7th, the blood in Teresa Hallback's car is identified as coming from both a male and a female. November 8th is when the key is found in Avery's bedroom, and when the license plates are found from her car in the yard, and bones and teeth are found in Avery's burn pit. November 9th, we actually didn't go over this yet. And Steven, are you paying attention, Maxwell? Here comes a mind shock. Maxwell, you awake?
November 9th, you said?
You ready for this mind shock?
Yeah.
I don't think we've discussed this. We're going to go into it more deeply in another episode, but Steven Avery's November 9th statement, he says he received a call from his friend, Tammy Weber. She claimed to have heard that police officers were trying to frame him and had planted the vehicle on his property, and that Penny Biernston, from this 85 frame-up, knew Teresa Hallback's family. Later, officers interviewed Tammy, and she stated that she heard from her son that a Two Rivers police officer said that Avery may be innocent. So again, this is all after the technical seizure of his property. So if the body was burned while Avery was in the cabin in Crivets, who else could have been burning a body at his own salvage yard? Because would his was any of his brothers, would Tadich or whatever his name is, would him or Bobby Dassey, would they be burning a body while there's a police presence there? What do you think? If police
No.
are searching Avery's place, are they going to burn her body right there? Or maybe they burned it elsewhere and brought it back, or whoever did it burned it elsewhere and brought it back.
I guess, well, burning it would be better than leaving the body alone, I guess.
But here's the thing, based on the pupil casings, the body would have had to have been burned on the 5th or the 6th.
Is it possible that the pupil casings were like from like a steak barbecue or something they left out and then I don't
And
know.
it got mixed. It got mixed with the remains somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, how would that have happened though?
Like they're barbecuing like in that big can. What do you call that can? And
Burn barrel.
And then they
Right. So they sprinkled a bunch of that in every single burn barrel and the 2 other quarry pile locations that were not on the Steven Avery Salvage Yard that also had pupil casings.
Oh, I missed the detail that it was
You missed
different
everything.
places.
Yeah, it wasn't just one. But anyway, on November 5th, 6 a.m., Avery leaves for the cabin in Crivets. So did he burn the body right before? Because the body would have had to have been burned probably not that early based on the temperatures. So we're probably looking at late November 5th or November 6th or even November 7th. So if Avery's leaving at 6 a.m. on November 5th for the Crivets cabin, he's not even there to burn anybody. Unless someone wants to allege that he took the body with him to Crivets, burned it there, and then brought the burned remains back to frame himself or his sister. I mean, I'm trying to come up with the scenarios that Gilters or Manitowoc or the state they can come up with to justify this timeline. It doesn't make any sense if this pupil case timeline is legitimate. And any biologists who are experts in pupil casings, feel free to chime in the comment section. So it would have had, so if the body had to have been cremated after November 6th, I mean, police have total control of the Avery property. They have custody of the Avery property. Because if they didn't find any remains there, but they found it on November 10th and November 11th, someone must have planted the remains there because they weren't there before the police took custody of the property. Are you following, Maxwell?
I missed a couple things, but I think I get the gist.
Because if everything was done at Cuss Road and it had nothing to do with Avery, that could possibly fit the timeline if someone was trying to frame Avery, regardless of whether it involved Manitowoc Law Enforcement or not.
Cuss Road is the one in front of the TEDx property, right?
It's behind Redon's. It's on Redon's in the back. It's okay. It's episode 19. There's countless maps and graphs and all of the podcasts. Good thing you were part of that. All right. Anyway. Because some people allege that if they found Teresa Hallback's body, like for example, let's say Ryan Hilligus was the perpetrator. Because if you haven't checked out our previous podcast in the Steven Avery series, Teresa's Last Day, we go over all of the situations and scenarios with Ryan Hilligus that don't quite add up. If he was the killer, he killed her at her house or whatever, drove the RAV to other areas where it was cited, and if they found, maybe he tried to frame it on Avery. Who knows? If he dumped the body near Cuss Road and the body had his DNA on it, if Teresa's fingernails had his DNA from scratching him or whatever, and they want to pin this whole thing on Avery, do they burn the body to get rid of the real killer's DNA? If this is really Teresa Hallback. Someone posted this theory on the Reddit. The body was left in a shallow grave for 5 days. Killer removes body and puts in a tarp or blanket and inadvertently collects dirt and other debris that harbors the pupae casings, and that debris falls to the bottom of tarp or blanket. The killer burns her body and then puts the ash and bone back into the same tarp or blanket that harbors the debris and pupae casings. The killer then disperses the bones and ash along with the pupae casings that were never burned. In other words, the pupae casings were moved from the original burial site in a blanket to the burn site, but left in the blanket during the burning, and then the cremains were put back in the blanket with the unburned pupae casings. Then both cremains and pupae casings were dumped out of blanket. That is how you would get cremains and pupae casings in the same spot. Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I've been wondering this whole time, like, if the casings surviving the fire, you know, or the
Well, they
heat.
wouldn't. They wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so
because if they burned the body on the 7th, if they found it, Cuss Road, whatever, Steven Avery is not there. So then they could find all of the so called evidence on November 8th. So Redaunt witnessed the lights coming from the quarry at night. So that might explain that as well. So if law enforcement was behind the cremains to get rid of the evidence of the real killer, that could exonerate Avery. Is that why they did all that? And then all the planting started right after that. What do you think about that timeline, Maxwell?
I'm not processing it.
What a shocker.
So what's the timeline?
If Steven Avery goes up to the cabin in Crivets, now police have full access to this Avery Salvage Yard. And Steven Avery's not even there. So if they found a body, if that was Hallback's body, and then they burned it so that way the killer's DNA could not be found on the body. Because if they know Avery's innocent, they don't want to leave any evidence tying to the real killer, right? Because their job is to pin Avery.
Oh yeah.
So would that be a good reason for them to burn the body, even if the body wasn't originally burned?
Yeah, it's weird.
Also, if they're not really Hallback's remains, or they are her remains, but they're mixed with animal remains, and the animal remains had the pupil casings on them. But letting Zellner test the bones would be a good idea. But of course, the state, who, if the truth is not afraid of investigation, why are they so terrified of giving Zellner anything to test? I mean, none of this will
That
make
that is kind of weird. I mean, like, what? I don't know. Like, did they did they fear that she's gonna twist the or mess with the evidence? I don't know.
Well, how could she mess with it? Like, it's already been tested. If she personally tests the evidence in her personal lab, that couldn't necessarily be exculpatory. But if she gives it to, let's say, if she doesn't test it herself, if she has, a neutral government agency test it, you know what I mean? They're not giving it to her to take home to her house.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Now, Brendan Dassey didn't talk about hacksawing Teresa Hallback, did he? I mean, we need to go through our the Brendan Dassey tapes episodes where we dissect the confessions. We'll be doing those shortly as well. And then, of course, there is the possibility that Teresa Hallback, if she was really killed, her body is elsewhere and nobody's ever found it or knows about it. And this was someone else's body. And other people still postulate further still that law enforcement never had Teresa Hallback's actual remains in the first place, so they can't give them up for testing because they don't have them. And they were pretending they were hers to convict Avery when it was actually either someone else's or animal bones or whatever. But everything's still on the up and up, according to all the guilters. The Manitowoc County Law Enforcement and the Wisconsin State Crime Lab are all completely infallible and completely beyond reproach when it comes to questioning their integrity in any way. And then, of course, the other thing interesting in this case that surprises no one is that there are no actual photographs of the crime scene in terms of the suspected human cremains because they didn't photograph them. So they took all this evidence without photograph. This entire investigation and operation is so beyond botched and complete. I mean, how it holds up to any kind of standards of law to be used as evidence in court, I don't know, but maybe there's people out there that could explain that. And then, of course, in our next episode, we'll be going over Teresa Hallback's cell activity and sightings of Teresa Hallback after October 31st. So if she was still alive that Monday, how does this change the case? Because then, if these pupil casings suggest that she was burned quite a few days, possibly 6 to 7 days after being killed, and she wasn't even killed on Halloween, what does that mean to the whole case? Because Avery went to Crivets, then he was arrested. So then he couldn't have done any of this, right?
Yeah.
Because these cremains were discovered November 8th, November 9th, and they were delivered 10th, 11th. Okay. So, yeah, it's none of this adds up as usual. Also, let's keep in mind that cadaver dogs went around the entire property and the quarries, and there was no evidence of a body being dismembered. So yeah, these pupil questions regarding pupil casings are just more in a long line of inconsistencies and impossibilities. And even if we take the pupil casings out of the equation, just again, when was the body dismembered? When was it burned? Why was it not found initially? I mean, these were highly trained dogs doing searches. No cadaver dog hit on Avery's burn pit. None of this adds up in any way. And why would Avery or even Bobby or Scott Tadich, whatever, they probably wouldn't be doing this on the Avery Salvage Yard either. So unless the remains were brought back, I mean, it's all very, very strange. Any final thoughts on the pupil casings, Maxwell? Or any of
No,
the
let up.
issues regarding even cutting the body?
Yeah. No, I'm good. Hey, what's the number or the statistics for the dogs when they get a hit? It's like 9 out of 10 or something like that.
Their accuracy rate?
Yeah.
It varies depending on conditions, but I think it depends if they can even detect remains that were underwater. I mean, it's very good. I think in most cases it's over 80 or 90%.
That's cool.
So, yeah, they shouldn't have had a problem, especially more than one dog, too. So yes, we hope you enjoyed another edition of MindShock True Crime in the Steven Avery series. So many questions to ponder, so many things that just simply don't add up to basic logical scrutiny. If you like the podcast, donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you like the episode if you like the podcast and share it across social media platforms. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can check us out Twitter, Reddit, Patreon, and like and follow our Facebook page for exclusive content. Any questions, comments, thoughts, theories, debunkings, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.
And Master Powers.
We'll catch you guys next time.